All right.
Hello, Wolter. Let's see, author of the Kensington Runestone and the Hooked X, and you had a show on History Channel, yeah?
Well, it was actually H2, which was History 2. But now the episodes are rerunning on History Channel. So yeah, it was basically history.
Yeah, for sure. So you kind of got your start with the Kensington Runestone. Really, that was your
Yep.
first big book.
Yep.
And yeah, so let's see. For people that don't know, it was found in Kensington, Minnesota, right?
Hmm.
And it's been controversial. There's been a lot of argument on what's going on with it. Is it fake? Is it real? And
Yeah. Well, if you want
yeah,
to know
so
the
yeah.
yeah, if you want to know the story, I'll tell you the story. The runestone was found in the fall of 1898 by a Swedish immigrant farmer who was clearing trees in preparation for farming with his two oldest sons, and they decided that they were going to take down this one particular aspen tree, which is a species of poplar. If people maybe know that species a little better. But anyway, it was estimated to be 25 to 30 years old. They cut off the roots around the base of the stump, and then they took a winch and they pulled it down, which pulled the stump out at the same time. And when they did this, tightly wrapped in the roots of the stone was this 202-pound stone that had a long inscription that they eventually figured out was carved in Scandinavian runes. Now, the inscription was um, difficult for the Scandinavian scholars at the time. Now, the first guy to ever look at it was a guy named Olaus Breda, who was a professor of Scandinavian languages at the University of Minnesota, and he looked at a handwritten copy of the stone. He never looked at the actual stone, and he didn't recognize about half of the characters that were carved on it. And he kind of did a rudimentary translation, but he concluded that it was a hoax. Now, the truth of the matter is, from my perspective, is that he decided that it was a hoax because he didn't want to admit that he couldn't figure out what it was. Clearly,
Mm,
he didn't understand what he was working with. And for some reason, it was beneath him to be able to say, I don't know. And really, that's what started this whole problem. And from there, the next scholars that looked at it already had a precedent that they had to tread very carefully around, because in academia, you don't just dismiss your predecessors. And I really believe that that initial opinion is where all the trouble started. The bottom line is this is basically the opinion that has, um, persevered throughout the decades and now over a century within academia. And when I've interacted with these people, I always ask them, tell me why. And then they'll tell me something, and I'll say, well, no, that's not true. This is the factual reason for what this particular situation or aspect might be. And at the end of the day, they really don't have anything to hang their hat on. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. The runestone came into my life in the year 2000, in July of 2000. And at that time, I was probably about 20, 25 years into operating my materials forensic laboratory called American Petrographic Services, sister company to American Engineering and Testing. And basically, what we do there is autopsies, if you will, on concrete and rock, primarily in the construction industry. So if there's a problem or a failure or something goes wrong, they will call us. They'll send samples, they'll do the analysis. We will tell them what caused the problem. And of course, the next thing that they want to know is who's responsible. So I get involved in the litigation, and things can be very sensitive at times. We've worked on projects like the fire damaged concrete at the Pentagon after 9/11. We're currently working still on the Surfside condo collapse down in Florida. So some of the projects we get involved in are pretty sensitive, and we don't screw around. We do it the right way. We follow scientific method. We look at the facts. We interpret those facts. And if appropriate, we will draw a conclusion. And I did the same thing with the runestone. But you have to understand, when I first looked at the runestone, I didn't know what it was. I never heard of it before. And frankly, I didn't care. I can't get emotionally invested in the projects that we work on. And when I did my final analysis, I compared the weathering of the inscriptions with tombstones that were hundreds of years old. And I was able to conclude that the weathering was older than 200 years. And that's from the year it was pulled out of the ground in 1898. And that effectively eliminated the possibility of a late 19th century hoax, unless you know somebody who's lived for 200 years or longer. I don't know if you do, Elliot, but I don't. So if it's not a late 19th century hoax, then really the only other plausible explanation is it must be genuine. Now, the inscription is dated to 1362. That's 130 years before Chris. You know, that guy that never set foot on the continent we now call the United States of America, that already had millions of people living here. I mean, the notion that he discovered anything is ridiculous. And thankfully, in this day and age, that ridiculous paradigm is going away. So, but it's still, you know, in the center of the continent, you know, who could have done this? Why would they do this? And so those are the questions that I've been investigating for the last 18 years, 20 years almost now. I guess it's 2023. It is 20 years. And I think I got it figured out.
Yeah. And that would brought you to the Hooked X, right? To kind of investigate what's going on with these characters. That my understanding is it's a weird, you know, almost Swedish, almost Norwegian dialect.
Well, actually, yeah.
The Hooked X, it doesn't appear.
I'm sorry, say that again. I missed that.
Oh, that the Hooked X doesn't appear in other texts. Is that right?
Right. That's correct. And, you know, again, you have to look at it pragmatically. You have to look at it scientifically. You know, one of the problems is that scholars used flawed logic. They looked at the inscription. They said, well, we've never seen this character. We've never seen that character. This goofy Hooked X character that's being used for the letter A, and the A sound in the inscription. We've never seen anything like that. So because we've never seen it, that means it must be wrong. Therefore, it's a hoax. That is completely flawed logic. The bottom line is you've never seen it. So maybe there's something to be learned here. Maybe there's a reason why it's on that stone. And frankly, I got to tell you, I mean, I have been criticized and attacked by a lot of these academics for not following proper scientific method, which is absolutely insane because I run a materials forensic laboratory. I follow proper scientific method every damn day of my life. And a lot of these people that are complaining about the work that I've done are people who are archaeologists, anthropologists, linguists, historians, runologists, people who work in soft science disciplines, in the humanities disciplines. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with these disciplines, but don't you dare tell me about scientific method when you're not trained in formal scientific method, and it shows, frankly. And you're going to tell me, a guy that does this every day? I mean, this is the hypocrisy that I've dealt with for the last 22 years. And I mean, I don't get mad anymore. I just laugh because this is the reason why we're still having this discussion. The Kensington Runestone is the most important historical artifact in the history of this country, without question, and one of the most important historical artifacts in the world. Now, getting back to the Hooked X, it's being used for the letter A, or the A sound within the inscription. It's used 22 times. That's not a coincidence. And I'm not going to go down that esoteric well right now. But if you look very carefully, the hooked X is a straight line stonemason's version of the Hebrew Aleph, which just so happens to be the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet used for the A sound, right? Now, that's not a coincidence. And it tells you something about the carver of the stone. He understood Hebrew. He understood gematria. He understood a lot of esoteric concepts that I talk about in my latest book called The Cryptic Code of the Templars in America. Now, it took me a long time to crack the code, if it were, to what this inscription is really telling us. What people need to understand is there are real aspects, factual aspects of the runestone, and there are allegorical, symbolic aspects of the stone as well. Now, numbers are numbers, but the numbers on the runestone are very important. And all I can tell you is that the Kensington inscription is so complicated, it is so brilliant, and it is so authentic that the scholars have missed out on an opportunity. And frankly, I should thank them for screwing it up and leaving it for me. But I will tell you this, Elliot, I did not fully understand the esoterics of the aspects of the inscription until I was initiated as a Freemason about 8 years ago. And man, I will tell you that is one of the most important decisions I ever made in my life. And it's helped me not only understand the runestone better, but the people who carved it. And make no mistake, if the runestone is authentic, and it is, it was carved in 1362, was placed as a land claim. It says it right on it. But it really is what I say to people now. The beginning of the founding of this country did not begin in 1776 with the Revolutionary War. It began in 1362 when the Knights Templar, the fugitive descendants of the Knights Templar who were put down in 1307, came to this continent and placed that runestone as a land claim for the sanctuary, the free Templar state that was eventually established by our founding fathers, who, make no mistake, were all Freemasons. The tenets upon which this nation was founded were upon the tenets of Freemasonry. I had a discussion with the guy in the gym today when I was playing basketball, working out, and his mind was blown. And I kept throwing facts at him, and he just couldn't refute. And he tried to, but he couldn't. So this is the story that needs to be told. It starts with the runestone, but I got to tell you, man, it just explodes and it goes to all kinds of places. But at the end of the day, it's really the history about the true founding of this country. And now it's more important than ever to get this story right, because people are talking about, what our founding fathers believed and what the amendments in the Constitution really mean. And frankly, they don't know what they're talking about. It's time they knew.
Yeah. So you're
trying to give
you're
you a
saying
little
that
space so you can
the people
interject.
that made
Pardon me?
yeah, for sure. So the people, I think the audio is off, but the people that made the Kensington Runestone, you're saying those were Templar?
Yes, they were ideological descendants of the Templars. A lot of people want to criticize me and say, oh, well, the Templars were dead by 1362. I get it, Sherlock. Thank you very much. You can kill people, but you can't kill an ideology or a belief system. And the truth of the matter is that you will not see on the historical narrative that we're all being fed, which is complete bullshit. And I'm sorry to swear, but it's bullshit. is that the Templars were the Christian fighters for the Roman Church. The leadership of the church were anything but Catholic. They were monotheists. They actually believed in a single deity that had dualistic aspects, male, female, heaven and earth, good, bad, light, dark, this concept of opposites that keep things in balance. They absolutely did not believe in this patriarchal, males are up here, females are down here, bullshit. And I'm just going to call it as it is. And the Roman Catholic Church, it took them 2 centuries to figure out what the Templars were really all about. And that's why they arrested them, tortured, and burned them, because they were pissed that they had been duped for 2 centuries. But by the time the church and the King of France moved on them, it was too late. The wheels of their mission had already been put into play. They tried to raid the treasury in Paris in 1307. And guess what? When they went there, everything was gone. Well, you think the Templars are stupid? Give me a break. They had planned, they knew this was coming, and they had already moved all of their wealth, their knowledge, their technology, and the remains of important historical figures that were their bloodline ancestors to the West. And it was all in preparation for establishing what they call a free Templar state in North America, a place that their ideological ancestors had been already millennia before them. So this is a bloodline, literal bloodline and historical bloodline story that goes back to Jesus, Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, to the Egyptians and beyond. Because if you study the ideology of these people and you study their movements and you understand the esoteric aspects, the story has been there the whole time. You just have to know how to read it.
Yeah. So do you know anything about the people that made the Kensington Runestone? Do we know what they speculate into that, and that it just looks like the Templar, or how do we connect it with the Templar? Just ideologically similar?
Well,
yeah,
ideologically it's the same, but see, people don't even understand what the Templar leadership was really all about. They go back to the standard narrative that they were the fighting force of the Catholic Church. They were all Catholic. They venerated Jesus. You got to understand the leadership of the Templars were bloodline descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but more importantly, John the Baptist. And so they knew this whole story, right? They understood the truth about this matter. They knew that Jesus wasn't the Son of God, for God's sakes. He was a person. He was a human being. And it's time that we just lay it out and be honest and objective about it. I know there's Christians that are going to lose their mind, but I'm sorry you were fed a bunch of BS and you bought it. But that's fine. And you can believe whatever you want. It's a free world and free will. You can believe what you want. I'm a scientist. I'm very spiritual, but at the same time, look, the history of the Catholic Church speaks for itself, okay? I don't have to go into it. It speaks for itself. And let me just cut to the chase, Elliot, okay? We're just going to get real here for a second, okay? Here's the problem with Freemasonry, which absolutely evolved directly from medieval Templarism and monotheism before that, okay? Here's the fundamental problem, and I'm just going to be real with you in the audience. Are you ready for this? I'm a Freemason, Knights Templar, some other things. The Roman Catholic Church hates us. They want to see us all dead. You know why that is? It's real simple. In Catholicism, you have to go through a human conduit to get to Creator, right? A priest, right? To achieve salvation. They require that, right? Now, I'm not going to get into what that leads to, we already know, right? In Freemasonry, it's not taught, but it's implied. Because when you become a Mason, you do have to make a statement about a belief in a higher power. Who that higher power is, what you call it, how you venerate it, is nobody else's business. It's up to you. And guess what? You don't need a human conduit. You can have a relationship with your deity all by yourself. And it's nobody's business how you choose to venerate your God, what you call it, what its name. I mean, it doesn't matter, because guess what? We're all talking about the same thing. In Masonry, when I took my obligation on the altar, I had to have some type of holy book or holy object. I happened to use the Thomas Jefferson Bible, because he took out all the miracles and all he did was paste together in 4 different languages the life of Jesus, because he wanted to understand the factual life of Jesus. But we also have a Quran, a Torah, a Buddhist Bible. Native brothers take their obligation on an eagle feather, because again, whatever you call the Great Spirit, Allah, Yahweh, God, Jesus, whatever you want to call it, we're all talking about the same thing. That is what the church is deathly afraid of. But you know what? Screw them. Screw them and their manipulation and their control and their persecution of anybody who doesn't follow their narrative. And I'm sorry, I'm a little lit today, but I'm not putting up with this crap anymore. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, freedom of conscience, that's a big thing in Freemasonry. Yeah. And, I mean, it's not really just, the Catholic Church. I think Baptists have issue with it that I think, yeah. Or if it's not our way, well.
Yeah. Are you look,
go ahead.
There's a part of me that wants to apologize, but really I don't want to apologize, because our world has been so negatively impacted by organized religion, and so many people are paying the price with guilt and self-loathing because they're not worthy enough, because some human conduit is trying to tell them what God thinks about them or what you have to do to get God's love. And you don't need to do any of that. You can do it all by yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, the spiritual pursuit that everybody at some point in their lives, at least I like to think about it, tries to pursue to answer those big questions in life, at the end of the day, you're all going to come back to yourself, right? And it breaks down to 2 words: know thyself. And a priest isn't going to help you with that. A cleric isn't going to help you with that. That's something that you're going to have to figure out on your own. And how you connect with that deity, your God, whatever you call it, that's your business. And good for you. So go for it. You don't need that human conduit. And if they don't like it, too bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a bit of, if it's, your religious ideas are just your own, right? Then, I mean, you think that I've heard, well, if you're not worshiping our God, right, then it's the devil, right? And maybe that's where the whole devil worshiping thing comes from.
Well, of course,
because that was way back in the day. I think the Templar were accused of devil worship.
Yeah, they were accused of a lot of things, and it's all just crap. I mean, the devil is something in hell was invented by the church. I mean, what, you don't believe in what we tell you to believe, so you're going to be relegated to hell and you're going to burn in flames forever because you're not following our dogma? I mean, that doesn't even make any sense, for Christ's sake. I mean, who would believe anything like that? There's no reason to believe it. It's not true. I don't know. I look, part of the reason why the Templars were persecuted was because they didn't buy into it either. They never did. They embraced it in ancient theology or ideology is the better word that goes back thousands of years. And so what they wanted to do was to create a sanctuary, what they called in the documents that we have, a free Templar state, where you were free to do whatever you wanted. That became the United States of America. I mean, I'm skipping over a lot of really interesting details, but what's important is for people to understand. All of our founding fathers were Freemasons. 53 of the 56 signers were Master Masons. 3 were not. So I would say that the country was founded on Freemasonry. People don't want to hear that. Some people don't want to hear that, but it's true. So when you want to talk about what the founding fathers believed in, what their intentions were, what do the the tenets of the Constitution really mean, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to talk to a Freemason, an enlightened Freemason. I mean, the first thing is freedom of religion, right? Because they already understood from the persecution that the Templars experienced by the Roman Catholic Church that religion and politics do not mix. We have representatives in our government right now that want to make Christianity the national religion. Our founding fathers they would roll in their graves if they heard this kind of talk. Absolutely not. Again, it goes back to you can believe whatever you want, whatever deity you want, whatever religion you want. In fact, what I love about that diversity is that, I don't even call myself a Christian. I call myself a deist. But the point is that when I talk to my Hebrew friends, I talk to my Buddhist friends, I talk to my Native American friends, I learn from them. It's interesting to talk about what their theology is, if that's the word. What drives them? What are the similarities? What are the differences? I learn and I grow from that. And it doesn't affect my faith, whatever my faith might be, or anybody's faith. It's just interesting to see what other people believe. But at the end of the day, it just boils down to the fact that they believe in a higher power. And by believing in a higher power, that should ingrain a certain amount of humility within you. And, that humility is really important, because if you're a type of person who thinks you know it all, how can you learn anything new? So, a lot of people are afraid of diversity. I welcome it. I joke, I've said this on podcasts before. I said, look, I know what all my buddies think that I went to high school and college with, right? I grew up with them. We all thought the same stuff. I know what they think. I don't learn anything new when I try to talk to them. I talk to people that had a completely different experience. If they come from a different country, if they're a different race, a different religion, that's when you learn. That's when you grow. And I just don't understand how people can't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I was just doing an interview yesterday on Freemasonry, and the whole, everybody is, from a different, social area, right?
Right.
A lot of different beliefs and backgrounds that it brings together people that otherwise,
yeah.
Which,
well,
which is nice that it's kind of,
yeah. No, it's wonderful, and I'll tell you an interesting story that I heard that's really good, and I think it was either Harry Truman or Herbert Hoover. It was one of our presidents back around either before or after the Second World War. I don't remember which one it was, but his gardener was the master of the lodge. And he was just a guy on the sidelines, right? He's just a brother Mason. And but when you're sitting in the East as the master of the lodge, your word goes. You are in charge. You're the guy. So here it was, the president of the United States goes into lodge, and he's not president anymore. He's just a brother in the lodge, and his gardener was the master that basically could tell him what to do and when to do it. Now, I find that interesting on one hand, but the other thing that's cool about it is after you serve as master of the lodge and your term is over, you go back to being a brother just like everybody else. I mean, you are a past master and there's a certain respect that's given there, but
Mhm.
you're just a regular brother just like anybody else. And there was another president that I think it was FDR, I'm pretty sure it was FDR, who showed up for lodge. And the equivalent of the Secret Service, one of his agents that was his, his protector, bodyguard said, "Sir, I have to go into lodge with you here. I can't let you go in there by yourself." And he said, "No, you're not coming in here with me." He said, "And to tell you the truth, I'm safer in there with my brothers than I am out here with you. So you're going to wait right here next to the Tyler, and I'll see you later." So there's a really cool dynamic there when it comes to Freemasonry, that we do have this hierarchy that you ascend to become the master of the lodge, but when your term is over, you go back to being a brother just like everybody else. And that's why in politics, when our founding fathers founded this government, the idea that they had was for people to come out from the farms, from their practices, from if they were lawyers or doctors or a dentist or a farmer, whatever they were, they would come into Washington and they would serve a specific length of time, and then they would go back to their practice and just be a farmer again or a doctor, whatever they were, and then somebody else would come in, right? And over the last 250 years, we instituted this policy where people can become lifetime politicians if they get reelected. And frankly, I think that has really harmed our republic, and we need to go back to term limits. But that'll never happen because these people aren't going to vote themselves out of a job. But really, that's what needs to happen, because it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. We need young blood. We need fresh ideas. We need new thinking. The world changes. And I just think that's what we should do in this country. But I guess I'm digressing now on a different path. But the point is, if you want to know what our founding fathers intended, these are some of the things that they believed in.
Wow. Yeah, like electing your leaders, right? Freemasonry was one of the first organizations to do that. I think the first were First Nations.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe Masons were the first.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, freedom of religion. What other?
Well, the other main. Well, I'll come back to the Native Brothers here in a second, but one of the other major tenets of Freemasonry that our founding fathers felt very strongly about, that goes back to the whole experience of the Knights Templar. Not only was it the Roman Catholic Church that persecuted the Templars, but it was the monarchies, in this case, the King of France, but it was the monarchies of Europe that were persecuting the people. And the monarchies, the kings, and were legitimized by the Roman Church, and then the king would legitimize the church. And this is what elevated these entities above the people, right? Mm-hmm. So the people were beholden to these institutions that were elevated erroneously, in my opinion, but the founding fathers understood this, right? We fought a revolution against a monarchy, right? Against England and the King of England. So, this idea that we want to have one that has autonomy and all this power. We set up this government that was actually based on the Iroquois system of government, where they separate the powers. And they also gave a seat at the table, the ultimate seat at the table, to the women. In the Iroquois system of government. Ben Franklin spent time with the Iroquois, and that's where he was played an integral part in the development of the structure of our government, this whole idea of the separation of powers. And The reason for that is they did not want the president, if you will, which is what we finally decided upon, to be elevated, the government to be elevated above the people. It's the people above the government. And I just, people say that and they think they understand that principle and they agree with it, but yet they don't practice what they preach. They vote in ways that undermine that system. And we came very close to losing that system. And I think we need to learn from that and make changes. But again, go back and look what the founders intended. Understand that history. Where did it come from? It came from the Knights Templar and their experience and their persecution. And they were the ones that set the table by rounding up that wealth, that knowledge, that technology, and the important historical remains. And they brought them over here and they hid them in North America for someday. And it took 400 years before our founding fathers took up the mantle and took those treasures and used them to fund the revolution, to establish the country that we now live in. So remember that, folks. Now, we haven't told this whole story yet. We're going to tell it. But this is the story of the history of this country. And one of the things they did was they came over here in 1358. They went out to the center of the continent. They carved and buried that Kensington Runestone as a land claim. If they ever needed to use it, it was there. But they didn't need to use it because the founding fathers finished the job. And then the runestone was found later. And here's why I say this, Elliot. The first three lines of the inscription say this: 8 Gotlanders and 22 Northmen on this acquisition business / taking up land. That's what the longest word in the inscription means. From Vinland far to the west. It's a land claim. It says it right on it. Now, this wasn't realized until relatively recently when they finally understood what the runes were during this medieval period, but that's what it says. And it all fits with the narrative. Hey, look, if the runestone's real, right? It's found in the center of the continent. It means this. Somebody carved it. They came from some place and they came here for some reason. They did this for some compelling reason. And to me, the establishment of that free Templar state that would become the United States of America, not coincidentally founded by Freemasons who evolved directly from the Templars, it all fits, as it must, if it's correct. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, that was one of my questions, is why in the middle of the continent, right? Is that just to show that they've, been straight to the middle of it? Or what do you think is behind that?
Well, I think there's more to it than that. First of all, if you get to the geographic center of the continent, and they went far beyond that. And, the other thing that a lot of people don't understand is the Lewis and Clark expedition fully understood that the Templars had been here before them. Every time they encountered a native tribe, they gave them the proper signs of recognition. Now, why would they bother with that? Because the natives had interacted with people that came here long before Lewis and Clark. But Lewis and Clark knew the signs, symbols, and tokens that they had to give to the native people who had already interacted with the Templars before them. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's a bunch of hate shit, but it's not. And I'll tell you why I know it's not crap. Because first of all, it's logic, okay? It makes sense. The Templars didn't fight their way to Kensington, for God's sakes, to get to the center of the continent. At that time, the natives would have wiped them out. The truth is, they were blood brothers. The Templars bonded with the indigenous people through ritual and intermarriage. How do I know this? I know this because the natives have told me directly. I've been in their sweat lodges, and I earned the right to ask the medicine man my questions. When it was my turn to speak, and I said, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Knights Templar, he said to me, "Oh, you mean our blood brothers?" I mean, think about it, Elliot. If the Kensington Runestone is an authentic medieval land claim carved by the Knights Templar, who the hell do you think they interacted with to get to the center of the continent? The natives, right? The indigenous people. The question is, why has nobody ever looked at this obvious aspect of the runestone? Maybe they know something. Of course, that little genocide thing that happened during, the settling of this continent by Europeans, literally killing them and stealing their land. They probably weren't exactly in a mood to talk. And frankly, the people that came here didn't want to talk. But they're ready to talk now because they practice the same Freemasonry that we do. They've been doing it for over 10,000 years. So when you say maybe we brought Freemasonry over here, no way, brother. They were doing it a long time before we were. And I would argue that they taught people that came over here, took it back to Europe, and then they came back. But I'm just telling you the truth. And there's a lot of people whose heads are going to be blown. But if you think about it logically, everything I'm saying makes perfect sense because it's what happened.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, so the Templar come to the United States or come over to North America, because I mean,
North America, there was no political borders at that time, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're saying that that's the origin of Freemasonry is contact with the First Nations.
Well, I don't know that for sure, because I think that Freemasonry has been practiced within indigenous tribes and cultures all around the world for at least 10,000 years and probably going way back before that. The Egyptians certainly practice their own version of Freemasonry that goes back 10,000 years and beyond. So we're talking about an ancient practice, an ancient craft that has basic historical truths that have to do with astronomy and the concept of as above, so below, right? As in the heavens, it will be on earth. And that's so true. It's absolutely true. When you delve into the deeper mysteries of Freemasonry, that becomes patently obvious. So this isn't something that developed recently. This has been around forever. And I would venture to guess, as long as humans have been walking on this planet, they've been practicing some form of Freemasonry, going back probably hundreds of thousands of years. We can't prove that, but intuitively, I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah, like, for example, Mithraism, right? If you're familiar with it, it's an incredible, like, the similarities are incredible, right?
Yeah.
Where we don't see like a connection, but like they had degrees, right, that were named, and here are the working tools of the degree, right? Like, here's a sword. I forget. I can't think of what they were,
Well,
right? But you'd be taught these specific instruments, right?
Yeah, I think some of the basic tools are the compass, the square. I mean, these are basic building tools, the plumb, the things that we use in Freemasonry, which are universal tools that have been used forever to build structures, right? And I mean, we all know that there are mysterious structures all over the world that we're finding out are a lot older than were originally thought, that have amazing architecture and construction methods that were used to build them. Some of the things that they did, we still can't figure out to this day. Just go to Machu Picchu and look at those stones, how they're just, I mean, you can't even stick a razor blade between the seams in the rock. They've been put together so perfectly. Who did that? And how did they learn those building practices? And I think when you go to places like that, or just go look at the pyramids or the Sphinx in Egypt and look at the amazing architecture there and construction, and if it doesn't sort of make you sit back and humble you a little bit, you're not being honest with yourself. And so, I mean, I think this goes back to the whole notion of Freemasonry and practical masonry, I guess in this case, is ancient. And we're still trying to figure out how old it is. And, I know the answer is it's much older than any of us realizes. Even the dates that we're seeing, people like Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, Randall Carlson, and other people like that are pushing back, the time frame of when these structures came to be. I think they're going to be pushed back even further, if not by those guys, people that are coming up behind them that are learning from them. So I think the one thing that we have to all agree on and be honest with ourselves is there's so much more that we don't know. And to try to pretend like you think you know it all is just a fool's game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's just so much we know. And then, sometimes we learn that we were off, right, about it with, scholarship that comes out later. So it is a bit wild.
Right.
And I read something that the ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx, and they built the pyramids around it. I'd even go into prehistory, which is pretty wild.
Well, it's interesting. The Sphinx is an amazing, stone structure that has the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, right? That they date back to about 4,000 BCE, before BP, before the present. And Robert Schoch has dated it back to over 10,000 years, and maybe even back as far as 12.5 to the Younger Dryas, and maybe even farther than that. But the head that we see now is not the original head. It was originally the head of a lion. And we had a discussion at a conference with Robert and with Graham Hancock several years ago. And we talked about that and about precession of the equinoxes, and how at the time that the Sphinx was probably carved would have been about over 10,000 years ago, when Leo was the primary constellation of the zodiac in the eastern sky at sunrise on the spring equinox. And, that pushes it back at least 10,000 years. And that makes a lot of sense to me. But over 6,000 or so years of weathering, the head of the lion probably was in pretty tough shape. And the pharaoh at the time, I forget which one it was, decided, I'm going to put my head on there and make it look brand new and start a new cult, right? So, but we had that discussion, and I remember telling Robert Schoch that, look, this is hard science, brother. Astronomy is just as much a hard science as geology. And I'm a geologist. I'm on your side. And he did some wonderful work on the weathering of the Sphinx and pushed it back far enough. But I also tried to give him another aspect to look at from a hard science standpoint that was consistent with his weathering work. And he embraced it. So, there you go. There's a lot to be learned.
Yeah, certainly. So here, if you want to, we can maybe look at some comments here that I see in the chat.
Oh, you got some people chiming in. I hope I didn't piss anyone off. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. I'm just being real.
Yeah. So
let me get my glasses.
Well, this is my little scope, but so we have a comment here. Templars. So we have Iblis here. Thank you for your comment. Templars were heavily influenced by esoteric Islamicate traditions like Sufism,
they were, including
where they even get the math.
Right about that. For sure. Where'd they get the maps?
Yeah,
The world had already been mapped long before the Templars came around. They just inherited them through the similar traditions. They were following in the footsteps of older traditions that they embraced. And remember, if I didn't make it clear before, I'll make it clear now. The leadership of the Knights Templar were not Catholic. They just pretended to be Catholic. They used the Virgin Mary as a metaphor for their goddess veneration, ancient beliefs that long predated Christianity. And they met in lodge with Sufis and other Islamic traditions that embraced a similar ancient ideology. So you're absolutely right about those esoteric traditions. But this was something that they kept quiet from the church. And remember, a lot of the symbolism and the ideology of the Roman Christianity was borrowed from older traditions, like their traditions. And so they understood what they were dealing with moving forward. They just, held their cards very close. But the world had been mapped long before the Templars came around, and this was some of the information that they were looking for and rounded up when they held Jerusalem during the time of the First, Second, Third Crusades. But when they were done, the standard narrative tells you that they were defeated by the Muslims and driven out, and that's BS. They were done. It was an organized withdrawal, and their mission was to head west. And no, it's not a simple question. Gotcha. And I know that was a rhetorical statement.
Yeah, for sure. And here's another comment by, there's an article by the Smithsonian admitting there's a Native American Muslim converts since the 10th century in Lake Michigan. I've not heard that.
That's new. That's news to me too, but none of this would surprise me. The fact that the Smithsonian institution is actually admitting this is kind of surprising because they're heavily influenced by the Roman Church, one of the primary funders, and they've been covering up a lot of information in many different aspects. It started with the mound building or the mound excavation program begun by the Smithsonian Institution in the 1840s. They were digging those mounds to make sure there wasn't going to be anything there that interrupted the Catholic narrative. Things like the Bat Creek stone got away from them, though, and there's other artifacts that were found that tell a different story that they screwed up on, frankly. But I digress.
Yeah, the mound builders, that's another mystery that, we still have no idea where those things came from.
Oh yes, we do. Those are ancient cultures, indigenous cultures that were here. These are the ancestors of the people that are already here that were interacting with visitors that came from the west, that came from the east, from the south. There was international travel or intercontinental travel that's been going on forever. Hey, excuse me 1 sec. Jan, answer this call, will you? It's Tim. Sorry about that. It's a call we've been waiting for from a brother, and she can handle it.
For sure.
You have another question?
So we'd presume we'd presume the mound builders would be natives, right? But are they just burial mounds, you figure, or?
No. Some of them are burial mounds. Some of them are ritual mounds. There are different types of mounds that serve different purposes within their cosmology, but they all had to do with things that were happening in the heavens. A lot of these mounds, for example, the Ohio earthworks and Cahokia, and even in Minnesota here, we have some amazing mounds, and down into what is now Iowa. These ritual sites were very important, but they all have a connection with what's happening in the heavens. And in fact, certain indigenous brothers who are part of the secret society of the natives, the Medewan, have shared with me that these different sites that go all across the continent in North America and indeed around the world connect with the heavens, and they're all interconnected. It's like a storybook that goes across the continent. Now, most of these mounds have been destroyed, but a lot of them are still preserved. And it all has to do with the heavens and this whole cosmology between what's happening up there and what's happening down here, and that whole ideology. But some of them go back tens of thousands of years. And they did interact with other people who came from different places. In fact, a lot of people don't understand. I don't know if you've ever heard this, Elliot. Did you know there's a thing called a world elder? Do you know what that is?
I don't think I've heard of that.
Within the indigenous culture, they have representatives. One person who represents each continent on the world. And they gather in council once every 8 years. 8 is a very important number in Templarism to the Native Americans. Again, they practice the same rituals, similar ideology, similar cosmology, and it goes back to the planet Venus, i.e. the goddess in the heavens that makes the 5-pointed star over 8 Earth years. This is why it's so important. It's not a coincidence. The very first thing on the Kensington Runestone is the number 8. 8 Goths, right? 8 Gotlanders. So, but these world elders meet on a different continent every 8 years and talk about what's happening in the world. Unfortunately, not all these representatives are showing up for their meetings in the last century because of problems that are happening in the world. And it's not by them. So that's what a world elder is.
Gotcha.
The current world elder for North America lives in Canada. Not going to tell you his name, but he's a close friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Freemasonry, like, what's your take on the ritual? Like, we have the middle chamber lecture, right? Where they, you're educated in terms of like, yeah, exactly. And like, what do you think that was really all about?
Well,
like,
I think it's about learning.
Like, is it a kind of?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that was it. If because it looks like we're kind of dealing with a bunch of archetypes, especially with the 3rd degree, right? And maybe something in us that wants to search, right? That staircase is about to get to the middle chamber,
right?
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the middle chamber staircase lecture is probably my favorite of the Blue Lodge, which is the first 3 degrees, and the 3, 5, 7 portions of that lecture, which teaches you about the 7 classic arts and sciences and just a whole bunch of other things that serve as an introduction to all kinds of different things that people should frankly be learning about or want to learn more about. And that's one of the things about Freemasonry that I absolutely love, is that it gives you a taste of a bunch of different subjects that, if you are so inclined, you can dig deeper into and learn more about. And I love that part about Freemasonry. And all I can tell you is you can take any of the degrees and, forget about the Scottish Rite or the York Rite, which are whole amazing journeys unto themselves that build upon the Blue Lodge, right? But really the foundation of Freemasonry, and really some of the most beautiful degrees, probably the most beautiful degrees and the most insightful, are those first 3 degrees, which includes the staircase lecture in the 2nd degree. And all it is an introduction to some of these esoteric concepts that it's up to each brother or sister to decide on their own if they want to dig deeper. And if you want to dig deeper, believe me, there's a lot to find. I mean, you can pursue the deeper meaning of these rituals really to the end of your life, and you'll never get to the bottom of it. It's just incredible. And the only one of the few regrets that I have in life is I wished I had become a Mason sooner. I was, I think 53 when I became a Mason, and I wished I would have knocked on the door long before that. But you know what? I wasn't ready at the time. So it's never too late, though.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what's your favorite thing about Masonry? Is it like, or let's see, I think you alluded to this before, but what's your conception of what Masonry is at its core, and what's your let's say biggest attraction to it?
Wow. Well, that's an interesting question. I think there are a lot of things about Masonry that I like, but I think really if you distill it down to one basic thing, and this isn't the right answer by any means, because there's a lot of right answers, but I think at the end of the day, it's about enlightenment. It's about learning new things, about things that you already thought you knew about, right? About people. But at the end of the day, it's about personal growth. And just like that rough ashlar and the perfect ashlar, that allegory of taking somebody who has not been initiated, who's basically a good person. They have their faults, but they're curious. They want to learn more. They want to become a better person. And so you start as a rough ashlar, right? A rough piece of stone that's kind of square with a bunch of rough edges that needs a lot of work, right? Before it becomes what we call a perfect ashlar. And if you look at a Masonic journey, when you start as somebody that doesn't know anything about this, you got basic rudimentary good traits, but you need some coaching. You need some enlightenment. You need to learn. And then you become this perfect ashlar, somebody who is, the corners are rounded, the rough edges are taken down, and now you become a nice block of stone that can go into the temple to serve its function structurally with all the other stones. And that allegory is you as a Mason going through these degrees and learning these lessons, these moral lessons, these intellectual lessons, and becoming a better person and going into society to help make society better, right? A better society, a better stone to support the temple, that temple being our society. And I got to tell you, I think that's just a beautiful analogy that at the end of the day, we can go as deep as we want into all these other aspects. But at the end of the day, it's about taking a good person and making them a better person that can serve society as a whole better. And really, that's what it's all about, is trying to make society better, to make your friends better, your family better, to make the world better. And that's what I love about Freemasonry. If I could sum it up, it would be the rough and perfect ashlar.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and that kind of tails back into the Masonic founding, right? Where we make the world a better place, right? With freedom and democracy and
right. Everybody has a vote. Everybody has a place at the table. And, that's what our republic is. It's based on democratic principles. And it's, in Masonry, there is no person that's better. Like I said, even the master of the lodge, eventually he becomes just another brother sitting on the sidelines like everybody else. One person, one vote. When we vote in Freemasonry, everybody's got to be on board. If we see a black ball, it's a problem. So that's really what our government is about. Now, it's a little bit different in that it's the majority rules. But I have to say, I was really troubled by all of this talk about, problems in our elections. And I don't want to get into politics too much, but this gets away from these democratic principles that were established by our brethren in the past. And, look, if there's something that's not working, if there's, something that's wrong, then bring it forth. Let's look at the facts and then let's fix it, right? But you can't just complain about the system if you don't win. And this is another thing that, I think about our kids. I think we got a little too much sometimes of everybody has to win. You get a participation trophy, and I I've coached a lot. My kids, I played a lot of sports, and one of the things that I learned was one team loses and one team wins. And you know what? After you fought a hard battle, I was a football player. I was a linebacker. Believe me, nobody was more intense and wanted to win more than me. But at the end of the day, those guys are trying hard too. And you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. And it's easy to win, right? It's easy to be a good winner. It's different when you lose, especially, like a championship game. But the true character and test of a person is how you handle defeat. What happens when somebody beats you? Because there's always going to be somebody better than you. And it's how you handle that. And I'm not a good winner. I'm not a good loser. But I respect a warrior and somebody that fights hard. And it transfers into life, right? It transfers into politics. You fight a good battle, people vote, and you accept the results and you move on. And I just remember another coach that I worked with, a kid came up to him and he was complaining and he's saying, oh, well, this guy cheated. He held me, and he was making all these excuses up. And the coach looked at him and said, that's not what I want to hear. What I want to hear you say is, I'll do better next time, coach. Take responsibility, work harder, make yourself better. But sometimes you're just going to get beat because the other guy's a better player. That's all there is to it, So that's how life is. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with Masonry, there's a little bit of, stressing maturity, right? That you're your own person, take responsibility for your life. And I think that we can maybe learn a little bit from that with, especially politics, where it seems so all about the individual and all about like winning at all costs, right? Where, it's like the House of Commons, which is based a little bit off of Freemasonry, right? We got the two benches on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have this at the center. And I've heard it's modeled at a Masonic lodge, but you can have a debate, right? But at the end of the day, you need to be friends, so you can't make it personal or,
right.
Just you have to be adults, right?
Yeah.
And I think
sometimes,
just being brothers and just thinking of the world that way.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
go ahead.
And that's an important part of the craft, right? When I spend a lot of time at my Scottish Rite, and when I go in there, I just feel safe, right? And and a lot of what's weird is when I go into lodge or I go into the Scottish Rite or I go to wherever a Masonic event, I know that they've all been through the same thing that I have as far as our degrees that we have gone through. Now, some have gone through Scottish Rite, York Rite, that's fine. But we've all gone through the Blue Lodge, right? And we all know what the other guy went through. And the support that they were given when they were doing their prove-ups, for example, right? I mean, you're not sitting there and guys are like, oh, I hope he screws up and looks like a fool. No, you want that guy to do a good job. And if he stumbles, you know, you'll throw him a word and he'll get going again, right? And that's just a beautiful thing, how we support each other. And, you know, I know that there are guys when I go to lodge and I go to Scottish Rite that are millionaires and guys that are, you know, working and barely getting by. And I don't even think about it, right? And I don't spend more time with one guy than another guy because, frankly, the guy that might have more money than the guy that has less money is not nearly as insightful and knowledgeable as the guy that doesn't have the money, because I don't give a crap about his money. I want to learn from him. I want to interact with him. And I just go in there and I just feel comfortable. I feel safe. And I always come out of there knowing something that I didn't know when I walked in. And I hope that maybe the interaction I have with people, maybe they know something that they didn't know when they came in that they may have learned from me. But I guess that's what they call the Brotherhood, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's yeah, so many people I probably do as far as a profession and whatnot. Yeah, brings everybody together.
Yeah,
for sure.
You know, we have in Minneapolis, we have a picture of all the white hats, the 33rd degree, illustrious brothers. You know, we have a wall of honor with their, well, it's in the 33rd room. And one of the guys, I'm not going to mention his name, it's not important, but at one time when I was younger, he was the richest guy in Minnesota. Everybody knew who he was. And, I mean, not within Masonry, but just in Minnesota, they all knew who he was. And when I became a Mason, I did not know this. And I walked into the 33rd room and I looked, I said, hey, holy crap, he was a Mason. And I already knew how much money that he had donated to certain charities, to certain causes. And I was really proud to see that this guy who I knew all about before I became a Mason was actually a Mason. And there are a lot of really important brothers that are out there that you don't even know are brothers, but they're just doing good work. And I've met a lot of people, or I've heard about a lot of people in government and military or whatever walk of life that you just look at and you say, that guy's doing good stuff. And then I find out later, oh, he's a brother. How cool is that? Yeah, it's Freemasonry is not what it was at one time, especially after World War II. There was this huge influx of people that joined because they served in the military and they missed that camaraderie, that brotherhood that they had, where literally they had each other's lives in their hands, right? And of course, that World War II generation, those heroes are pretty much gone now. And so we've seen a decline, but I think we're seeing a resurgence, right? Because there's a lot of young guys that I run into that are looking for something beyond, their normal life experience. They're looking for something beyond just getting married, having kids. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And I'm not trying to diminish it at all, but, and we're seeing a lot of younger guys coming into Freemasonry. And I have to say, a lot of these guys I'm meeting are really impressive people. They're very smart. They're very insightful. They're eager to learn. I mean, they are eager to learn. They want to be enlightened. And so it's giving older guys like me an opportunity to speak like this and go on and hopefully share knowledge with them and bring them along, because they're the future, right? Someday we're all going to be dead, and the next generation and the generation after that is going to come up. And I see that as such a cool thing. And so while I'm here and I have this opportunity that you're giving me here, brother, and I appreciate it, to hopefully spread some light. And, I apologize if I was a little caustic before, but I only say what I believe. And when I get a little bit fired up, it's because I'm passionate about what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And, this thing with the church, it's not kidding around. This is serious business. And, people need to think for themselves. They need to reach out and dig and find the answers themselves, not be taught or be programmed. Think for yourself and follow your gut instincts, because your instinct is probably right. And, when you make yourself a better person, you make the world a better place. And really, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I say to people all the time, I want to, leave a legacy where I hope people say that I tried to make the world a better place for my kids, my grandkids, and the ones I'll never meet. Make this world a better place than we left it. And right now is a really critical time. We're kind of teetering on a tenuous edge. And it's important that people understand this. And we all have to work together, whether you're Masons or not. Masonry isn't for everybody, but making the world a better place is for everybody. And that's all of our job. That's all of our responsibility. And you better do it. Otherwise, you're just not being responsible. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. Yeah. And that might be a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
Unless, was there anything else that we didn't, I mean, it's hard to, you would have wanted.
I'm sorry, you were cutting out there a little bit, Elliot. I didn't hear you.
Sorry about that. I think, I don't know what it is, but anything that we didn't touch on that you would have wanted to touch on, or final thoughts?
Well, again, I think it's a great opportunity to be on here, to talk to people, to try to, I try to share what I think is really important. One of the most important stories that we talked about was the true founding of United States of America. And, historians look back at our founding fathers, and yes, they had their warts. A lot of them were slave owners. I think that's something that we have to be honest about. But the other thing is you have to consider context of the time that these people lived. And I think sometimes we get caught up in lionizing them and aggrandizing them as being these perfect people when they certainly weren't perfect. I mean, there's no question. We're all imperfect, right? But at the same time, I think we have to acknowledge, understand, and appreciate the sacrifices that they made, and the fact they put their lives on the line, and the odds were against them that they would be able to pull this off and establish this free Templar state we now call the United States of America. But I also think it's important to understand that they had help from their ideological ancestors who brought money, artifacts, knowledge, technology, and remains of important people here for them to use to finish the job that the Templars started, centuries before them. And we need to understand that. We need to appreciate it. And as I always say, and I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but before we can go forward into the future intelligently, we have to understand where we've already been. And we don't the historical narrative that we're taught, our kids are taught in school, is not correct. We need to fix it. And this isn't, I'm not shilling for Masonry. I'm just telling you the truth. It just so happens that Freemasonry was at the core of what started this whole thing. And it is what it is. And you can like it or not like it, but it's the truth. And you know what they say, the truth will set you free.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was fun and interesting and a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And yeah, and everybody watching, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Well, brother, I appreciate your having me on here. And by the way, if people are interested, if you want to engage me with a question or a comment, or you want to go back and look at some of the episodes that we did in the past on America on Earth and other shows, I have a blog called Scott Wolter Answers. And there's some pretty lively discussion that we've had on that site. So if you want to go there, you certainly can. The other thing is, if you're interested in any of my books or my wife Janet's book, go to hookedx.com. And if you buy a book off that site, we sign everyone. We'll personalize it for you. And call me biased, but I think it's pretty good stuff on there. So you might want to check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Good deal. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this has been Brave New History. Yep. Thank you for coming.